Okay, so there's going to be times where you're asked to find the distance between 2 points, in this case -7, 1, and -5, 7, and you're not going to have a graph, so you're just going to be left with the numbers. In that event, you're going to want to use what's called the distance formula. It's d equals the square root, d being distance, is equal to the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Now, it looks like it's a lot, but it really isn't. The only thing you're really doing here is you're trying to find the distance between your two x values if you were to go straight across on the x-axis. And then the same thing with the y. If you went straight up and down vertically, you would want to know the distance between those 2 points. It's just like when we did the graph and we connected and made a right triangle. You're finding pretty much the legs of the triangle here, and it's basically just doing the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, you're going to have two values, they're going to be squared, add them together, take the square root. It's the same thing, it's just written out in this nice little formula for us. So the first thing I'm going to want to do, I'm going to label my points. Always label your points, okay? So I'm going to call that x1 and y1. Anytime you use this, if you're using x1, y1, and x2, y2s, just it's a good habit to go ahead and say, well, if this is x1, this is 0.1. So the 1 means 0.1, right? So it's x1. Then the y value associated with that same point is going to be y1. And then the same thing with the 2's. So you have x2 and y2. It's not really going to give you the wrong answer here, but it's just good to keep good order because later on in other instances, this is going to matter a lot. So we're going to say the distance of, and I'm going to bring down my radicals. Now I'm just going to plug in numbers. My x2 is -5, and that comes from where I labeled it. Don't know why I put the comma there. And then I'm going to subtract my x1, which is -7. I got to square it all. You start getting, when you got negative numbers, the parentheses start coming out, and don't get too confused there. My y2 value is 7, and my y1 value is 1. All right, so if you're having trouble following here, my x2 value, well, I just went over here and looked. My x2 is -5, so that's why I plugged a -5 in there. And then I had to bring down my subtraction sign. My x1 is -7, so I'm subtracting a -7. That's what that is in parentheses. That's kind of sloppy, but it's a -7. And then I brought down my squared. And then the same thing over here. I brought down my plus sign. My y2 was 7 based on over here to the side where I labeled my y2 as 7. And then my y1 was a +1, so y1, 1, that's where that came from. So now I can just go ahead and keep going with my math. And the first few times you do it, you're going to want to double check that those are right, just like I did right there. You want to double check that those numbers were written down correctly the first time. So I have -5 minus the -7. Well, -5 minus the -7 is the same as saying -5 plus 7. It's going to give me a +2. Got to bring down my squared. And then I have 7 minus 1. I brought down my plus sign already. 7 minus 1 is 6. That's also going to be squared. Okay, so at this point, all I have to do is 2 squared is 4. 6 squared is 36. And now I can just add them together. So D is equal to the square root of 40. Now for this problem, it says to put it in simplest radical form, and that's the simplest radical form. It doesn't come out to an even number. It's like a 6.3 is what it should be. But it doesn't say round to the nearest tenth. It says simple radical form. So you're done at that point. The answer is square root of 40. On this stuff right here, just to recap, I had 7 minus 1 gave me this 6, and I had to bring that squared down. And then I had -5 minus the -7 gave me a +2, and I also brought down the squared. So 2 squared was 4, 6 squared was my 36. Then I combined those and made 40. So that's where all the numbers came from. If you need to see that over and over again, just replay the video. And then if that still doesn't get you where you need to be, then you need to get a hold of me on the Google Meet. I'm going to do another example, though. We'll do 2 examples here. Okay, so here's the second example. We've got our distance formula written down. We have a new point, but we're going to do the exact same math. I'm going to label my points. I've got x1 and y1. And then the other one, I'm going to have x2 and y2. And even if you're having trouble following, you can write it down to the side. You can say x1 is equal to -1. x2 is going to be equal to 4. y1 is going to equal 9. And then y2 is going to equal -3. And that comes from where I labeled up here. So x1, -1, that's where it went. And then so on. So then whenever I go to plugging numbers in, it's a little bit easier to follow. So I brought down my d equals, so distance equals, brought down my radical. Now I just got to plug numbers in. My x2 is a +4. My x1 is a -1. So plug that in. And I want to add that to, I'm going to square it and then add it to, my y2 is -3. I'm going to subtract my y1, which is 9, and I'm going to square that part. So now I have d equals, let's bring everything down. 4 minus the -1 is the same as 4 plus 1, so I've got 5. I'm going to square it, so it'll be 5 squared. I have -3 minus 9, so that's going to give us -12. And since it's negative, I'll put it in parentheses, and I'm going to square that one. So now I have d equals the square root of 5 squared is 25. -12 squared is 144. Now if you try to do that on your calculator and you had -12 and you squared it, if you didn't put the -12 in parentheses, it might have gave you a -144 because the negative sign wouldn't be used in that calculation on the calculator. It confuses it sometimes. But anytime you multiply two negative numbers together, in this case -12 times -12, then the negatives are going to cancel out and you're going to have positive. That's where the positive 144 comes. So now I'm going to just keep on working. I've got square root of, and I've got 25 and 144. If you add those together, you get 169. And the square root of 169 comes out even, it's 13. So even though it says simple radical form up here, the radical can be reduced and the actual answer is just 13. It's just the number 13. All right, so that don't mean leave it as square root of 169 just because it says radical form. Square root of 169 comes out even at 13, so that's your answer. It's just 13. If you have any questions at all, click on the Google Meet during class time. I will be available. I'll be right there ready to go to answer your questions. I know this Delta Math stuff seems like it's a little bit intense, but it's really, really good if you pay attention and do your work. It can help you out a lot.